40 coins. That's what I owe for the room above the tannery, and the landlord stopped smiling about it 2 weeks ago. I count what's in my pocket on the walk to the shop. 3 coins. I do the math again in case it changed. It didn't. Tarn's Antiquities opens at 8. I'm there at 7 to carry crates nobody else wants to carry. Felix Tarn doesn't arrive before 10 most days, which is fine by me, because the shop is quieter without him in it. Careful with that one, old Ren says, pointing at a crate of glassware with his chin since both his hands are full. Client paid for insurance, not for you dropping it on your foot. I've dropped exactly 0 crates this month. Months young. I set the crate down like it's made of eggshells. Ren laughs and goes back to sorting invoices he'll hand to Felix and get no thanks for. We're the same, Ren and me, except he's been swallowing this particular kind of nothing for 11 years, and I've only been doing it for 8 months. 8 months since my father's name stopped being worth anything in this city, and I still haven't found a job that respects mine. I opened the crate my father left me, the one thing Felix hasn't found a reason to throw out, mostly because he doesn't know it's here. Broken tools, a cracked accounting ledger, a stack of letters I haven't read because reading them means admitting he's not walking through that door to explain them. At the bottom, wrapped in a rag that used to be a shirt, there's a loop. 1 lens. The frame is bent, and there's a hairline crack running through the glass like a vein. I've looked at this thing 4 times since he died and put it back 4 times. Today I pick it up because my thumb needs something to do besides count coins. The crack catches my skin, not deep. A thin red line across my thumb, barely worth noticing. Then the shop tilts sideways. Not physically. Everything in front of me, the crates, the shelves, a chipped vase Ren left on the counter, grows a second layer I can see through the first. Faint lines, pale gold, tracing the edges of things like a draftsman went over the world with a very fine pen. Numbers hover near the vase. Small ones. I don't understand them yet, but I understand immediately and completely that the vase is 19 years old and was made by someone who has never left this city. I sit down on the crate before I fall down. You look like you saw a ghost, Ren says. Just tired. He shrugs and goes back to his invoices. I look at the loop in my hand. The crack is still there. Nothing about it looks different. I put it in my coat pocket instead of the crate, and I don't examine why. Felix walks in at 11, which for him counts as early. He's wearing a coat that costs more than I'll make this year, and he's already annoyed about something, which is his resting condition. The Corvain woman is coming at 2, he says, not to me specifically, to the room. She wants to know if the silver set her grandmother left her is worth selling. Tell her it's worth 80 and I'll sell it for 300. It's worth closer to 200, I say, before I decide to say it. Felix stops. Excuse me? I don't know how I know. I just know. The set is sitting on the back shelf, and when I glance at it, gold lines settle over the pattern on the handles, and a number sits beside it that isn't 80. The maker's mark. It's not common stock, it's early Varan work before the guild standardized the hallmark. It's worth more than we've been telling people. Felix looks at me the way he looks at furniture he's deciding whether to keep. And you know this how. I looked at it. You looked at it. He laughs, short and humorless. Ren's been in this trade 11 years and missed that. You've been sweeping floors for 8 months. I could be wrong. I'm not wrong. I don't say that part. Felix waves a hand like he's swatting a fly and walks into the back office. I catch Ren's eye. He raises an eyebrow, the closest thing to a compliment he gives anyone. Neither of us mentions it again. The silver set gets sold for 210 coins that afternoon, and Felix pockets the difference without once looking my way to say I told him something true. I don't get a cut of that. I didn't expect one. The vase arrives on a Thursday, carried in by 2 men who look nervous about dropping something worth more than they'll see in a decade of wages. Felix supervises the unpacking himself, which tells me everything about how much money is involved. It's a tall piece, pale blue glaze, dragons chasing each other around the shoulder in a style I recognize from the plates in my father's books. Second Dynasty. The kind of thing that shows up at auction maybe once a generation and sells for enough to buy a street. Felix bought it from a private seller 2 towns over. Paid for it with money borrowed against his family's name, because even Tarns don't keep this kind of cash sitting in a drawer. He's already told 3 separate clients he has something extraordinary coming. 2 towns over, in a workshop that smells like turpentine and old glue, a man with ink-stained fingers wipes down a kiln that's been running hot for 6 weeks straight. On the shelf behind him sit 4 more vases, exactly like the one now sitting in Tarn's Antiquities. He doesn't know Felix Tarn's name. He doesn't need to. He was paid, and he moved on to the next piece. I don't know any of that yet. I find out later from Dan, months from now. Right now, all I know is that when Felix sets the vase on the display stand and steps back to admire it, and I glance at it out of habit, the gold lines settle over the glaze and tell me something that makes my stomach drop. The number beside it isn't a value. It's an age. 11 months. Felix. Not now, I'm working out where to put the lighting. Felix, the vase isn't authentic. The shop goes quiet in the particular way a room goes quiet when someone says something that can't be unsaid. Ren stops sorting invoices. The two delivery men, still lingering for their tip, exchange a glance. Felix turns around slowly. What did you just say? It's a reproduction, recent, less than a year old. The glaze technique is right, the shape is right, whoever made it studied the real thing closely. But it's not Second Dynasty. It's this year. You're going to stand there and tell me, in front of witnesses, that I paid what I paid for a fake. I'm telling you what I see. You clean crates. You're the son of a man who lost his license for exactly this kind of accusation, and now you want to make the same mistake with my money. That lands where he wants it to land. I feel it land. I don't say anything back because there isn't anything to say that won't make this worse, and because some part of me, cold and separate from the part that's angry, is already certain I'm right and doesn't need him to agree. The door opens. A man in gilt gray steps in. An inspector, here on an unrelated errand about export permits. The kind of coincidence that only happens in stories, except this one is actually happening. He's heard the last part of the conversation from the street. Is there a dispute over an item's authenticity? He asks, with the particular interest of a man whose entire job is disputes over authenticity. Felix's face does something complicated. Losing this argument in front of an inspector is worse than losing it in front of Ren. No dispute, Felix says. My former assistant is confused. Present, I almost correct. I don't. The inspector looks at the vase, then at me, then back at the vase. May I? He takes 10 minutes with it. Loop of his own, standard guild issue, no crack in the lens. He checks the glaze under a lamp, checks the base, checks the firing marks. I already know what he'll find. I knew it in 4 seconds without touching the thing. The glaze composition is inconsistent with the period, the inspector says finally. I'd want a full lab assessment before I'd certify this as anything other than a well-made contemporary piece. Felix's face goes through 3 colors. The 2 delivery men leave without asking for their tip. He waits until the inspector is gone to come apart. Get out, Felix says. His voice isn't loud. It's worse than loud. Get out of my shop, Felix. You cost me a sale in front of a guild inspector. You humiliated me in my own business. Get your things and get out, and don't come back expecting a reference because I'll tell every dealer in this city that you're your father's son in every way that matters. I go to the back to get my coat. My father's crate is under the counter where I've kept it for 8 months, out of the way, out of sight. Felix follows me back there, still talking, still furious, and when I reach for the crate, he grabs the edge of it first. This is shop property. Everything left on these premises belongs to the shop. That's my father's. Then you should have taken it home 8 months ago instead of leaving it cluttering my storeroom. He pulls. I pull back. The crate tips and the old desk drawer inside it, the last piece of furniture that was actually his, small enough that I'd kept meaning to carry it home and never had the coin for a cart, slides out and hits the stone floor. It splits down the joint his own hands cut 40 years ago. Nobody says anything for a second. Felix looks almost sorry, in the way people look sorry right before they decide not to be. Take your junk and go, he says, and walks into the back office and doesn't come out again. I kneel on the floor of a shop that isn't mine anymore and pick up the pieces of a drawer that used to hold my father's calibration weights. Ren crouches down next to me without a word and starts collecting the smaller fragments, the ones that scattered furthest. He's not wrong that you cost him money, Ren says quietly. I know. He's also an idiot who just proved a guild inspector could catch what an 8-month errand boy caught first. That's going to follow him. Doesn't fix the drawer. No, Ren agrees. It doesn't. I wrap the broken pieces in what's left of the rag and fit them back into the crate as carefully as I can, like the wood might still care how it's treated. 3 coins in my pocket. 40 owed by Friday. No job as of 11 minutes ago, and a reference that's about to be actively bad instead of merely absent. I pick up the crate and walk out through the front of the shop, past the vase still glowing faintly gold at the edges to eyes that only I have. Past the counter where I sold a stranger's grandmother's silver for a fair price and got nothing for it, into a street that doesn't know yet that anything in it has changed. My thumb still stings where the crack in the glass caught it. I put my hand in my pocket and feel the loop there, cold and small and entirely mine, and for the first time in 8 months, I don't feel like I'm carrying my father's failure. I feel like I'm carrying something he left on purpose. I don't know yet what it costs to use it. I'll find that out soon enough. Right now, I just know I have 3 coins, no job, and a piece of broken furniture, and somehow, walking away from the wreckage of the only work I had, I'm not as afraid as I should be. She's leaning against the wall across the street when I come out, arms crossed, watching Tarn's antiquities like she's waiting for the building itself to apologize to her. "You're the one who called the vase," she says. "Not a question. I'm the one who got fired for calling the vase." "Same thing, better outcome." She pushes off the wall. "Aria Welsh, buy you dinner. You look like you haven't eaten since Tuesday. It's Thursday. My point stands. I should say no." A stranger offering food to a man carrying a broken crate is the setup to at least 4 different kinds of trouble I've heard about from Ren over the years. But 3 coins doesn't buy dinner, and I'm curious in the specific way that overrides good sense, so I follow her. The restaurant is nicer than anywhere I've eaten in years, the kind of place where the bread costs more than my rent installment. I order the cheapest thing on the menu out of habit, and she orders 3 dishes and tells the server to bring them all at once. "You're not going to poison me," I say, and then rob a corpse. "That's not efficient. You'd have done it in an alley. I like him," she tells no one in particular, then looks at me. "I run a crew. Hunters technically, though most of what we hunt doesn't have a pulse. We go into places nobody sane goes into, and we bring out things nobody sane touches. Right now there's 3 of us. There used to be a 4th slot open. It hasn't been open in a long time. Why tell me this? Because I watched you stand in a room full of people who'd have bought that vase without blinking, including a man whose entire job is not blinking at fakes, and you called it in 4 seconds. I've worked with appraisers for 6 years. None of them are that fast. Maybe I got lucky. Were you lucky the first time too? The silver set this morning? I don't ask how she knows about the silver set. I decide I don't want to know yet. What do you actually do, I say instead. Specifically, break seals, physically, wards, locks, old magic wound into stone. I put my hands on it and take it apart. There's a technical name for it. I don't use it. It's pretentious. She leans forward. Dan handles strategy, languages, maps. Rita handles anything that needs to die from 300 feet before it gets close enough to be a problem. We're good. We're not complete, and you think I'm the missing piece. I think you might be. I don't hand out trial runs for free. She studies me for a second too long. You seeing anyone? What? It's a real question. We work close, long hours, small spaces. If you've got someone waiting up for you every night, that's a scheduling problem, not a moral one, but I need to know. No. Nobody's waiting up. Good. Family? My mother's gone. My father's dead 5 years. I say it flat because if I say it any other way, it stops being a fact and starts being something I have to feel in front of a stranger. She doesn't apologize, which I appreciate more than I expect to. Debts? Enemies? Anyone going to come looking for you with a grudge if you start making a name? Felix Tarn, as of about 2 hours ago. He doesn't count. Everyone in this city has a grudge against a Tarn eventually. She sits back. Here's the offer. 1 job. You don't get paid if you fail, and failing might mean you don't walk out of the building we're going into. If you make it through, you get a cut, and we talk about whether this becomes permanent. That's not much of an offer. It's not supposed to be comfortable. It's supposed to be honest. She pushes a plate toward me. Eat. You'll need it. The vault used to belong to a merchant house that dissolved 2 generations ago. Its contents seized by the guild and locked away pending an inventory that never happened because nobody currently employed by the guild wants to spend a week in a building that kills people who guess wrong. Dan meets us at the door. He's got the bearing of someone raised to inherit a title and the clothes of someone who sold that inheritance to buy better boots. He looks me over once, unimpressed, and hands me a folded paper without introducing himself. Layout, as far as we know it, he says. Which isn't far. Whoever built this place didn't believe in leaving notes. Rita's already inside, perched near the entrance with a crossbow that looks more like an argument than a weapon. She nods at me, doesn't smile. I decide that's not personal. The job, Arya says, walking us through the outer chamber, is a room. 100 items on shelves, give or take. One of them is a key. Real metal, real weight, opens the vault door at the far end. The other 99 are decoys. Touch a decoy, the room decides you're a thief instead of an appraiser, and it responds accordingly. How does it respond? Badly, Rita says, from somewhere behind me. There's precedent for this kind of ward, Dan adds. Old merchant houses use them to punish theft without needing a guard on payroll. Efficient, expensive to build. Nobody's cracked one clean in 30 years. We stand in front of the door to the room. My thumb still has a thin red line where the glass caught it 3 days ago. I haven't told them about the loop. I haven't told anyone. If you want to walk away, Arya says, now's the time. Nobody thinks less of you. I think about the 3 coins in my pocket. I think about 40 owed by Friday. I think about a man in a workshop 2 towns over who's never going to answer for the fake vase unless someone with eyes like mine keeps looking. I'm going in. The room is exactly what she described. Shelves in tight rows, packed with cups, coins, small statues, jewelry boxes. 100 ordinary-looking objects gathering dust under lamplight that flickers just enough to make counting them properly feel impossible. I close my eyes for a second. When I open them, the gold lines are already there, settling over the room the way they settled over the vase. Except this time there's 100 layers of it at once, and my head feels like someone's pressing a thumb behind my eye. Most of the shelf is noise. Cheap reproductions, deliberately aged, nothing underneath the surface, but more surface. I walk the first row slow, letting the lines wash past pieces that read as hollow, as recent, as nothing. Second row, third shelf down, there's a shard of gray pottery sitting between 2 ornate silver cups that are practically screaming for attention. It's the ugliest thing on the shelf. No one would look at it twice. It's glowing at the edges like it's on fire. That one, I say. Dan's already moving to check his notes. The map doesn't mark anything specific in that section. It's not on your map because whoever built this wanted the ugly thing overlooked. I reach for it. My hand's shaking slightly, and I notice Rita's crossbow shift a fraction toward the shelf, ready in case I'm wrong. It's a key, not shaped like one. Old trick. Hide the function inside something that doesn't look like it has one. I pick it up. The room doesn't kill me. Somewhere in the wall, a mechanism grinds and releases, and the far door swings open a hand's width on its own. Nobody says anything for a second. Then Arya laughs, short and surprised, and claps me once on the shoulder hard enough to stagger me. 4 seconds on the vase, she says. 90 seconds on 100 items rigged to kill you. I don't hand out compliments easy, but that's not luck twice. I told you I wasn't lucky. You told me. I didn't believe you. Believing you now. The vault beyond holds enough to make the walk worth it several times over. Sealed boxes of old currency. A scattering of minor artifacts the guild will pay well to have cataloged and returned to legal custody. My cut, once Dan finishes the arithmetic on the walk back out, comes to more coin than I've held at once in my life. I pay the landlord before I do anything else. 40 owed, 40 handed over, and the look on his face when I count it out in full instead of begging for another week is worth almost as much as the money itself. I eat a real meal that night, not the cheapest thing on a menu, just food, enough of it, without doing math in my head between bites. It's not luxury. It's the absence of hunger, which after 8 months feels almost as good. Arya finds me at the same corner table 2 days later. Trial's over, she says, sitting down across from me without asking. You didn't die, you didn't slow us down, and you found something none of the rest of us could have found in a week of looking. Dan wants proof it wasn't a fluke. Rita doesn't talk about people she doesn't respect, so the fact that she hasn't threatened you yet is basically a character reference. And you? I think you're going to be a problem for a lot of people who've been getting away with things for a long time. She smiles, not entirely kind. Welcome to the Dust Catchers. Probationary. Don't make me regret the vault. I think about my father's crate, still sitting broken in the corner of my rented room. I think about a workshop 2 towns over, still turning out fakes with someone's real history stamped on top of them. I don't know yet how deep this goes. I know I'm not walking away from finding out. I won't, I say, and mean it more than I expect to. The counterfeiters work out of a stall at the East Market, selling coins they age with vinegar and a hot pan, and passing off glass beads as sea pearl inlay to anyone who doesn't look too closely. It's not a hard case. It's the kind of case Dan takes on purpose to see what I'd do with something that isn't trying to kill me. 2 brothers, he says, walking beside me through the market crowd, selling to tourists mostly, some to smaller shops that don't check their stock carefully. Guilds had 3 complaints. Nobody's caught them holding anything yet, because they don't hold anything obviously fake. Correct, which is where you come in. The stall is exactly where Dan's notes say it'll be, buried between a spice seller and a man selling knives of questionable legality. Two brothers, one loud, one quiet, both watching the crowd for Guild Gray the way rabbits watch for hawks. I don't need to touch anything. I walk past once, slow, and the gold lines settle over half the stall at a glance. 3 coins that are real, buried among 40 that aren't. A pearl inlay ring that's colored glass wearing a story it never earned. The blue box, second shelf, I tell Rita, who's positioned herself across the row, pretending to examine knives she has no intention of buying. That's where they keep the ones they know are fake. If the guild searches the front stall only, they'll miss it. She doesn't ask how I know. Nobody asks anymore, which either means they trust me or they've decided the answer doesn't matter as long as I keep being right. The raid takes 11 minutes. The loud brother tries to run and doesn't get far. The quiet one starts talking before Rita finishes reading him his rights under guild jurisdiction, which tells me he was always the smarter one and always going to fold first. We hand the whole thing to the guild constables with the blue box as evidence, and Arya collects the bounty before the inks dry on the report. It's not much money. It's honest money, and it's the first job where nobody almost dies, and I find I don't miss the almost dying nearly as much as I expected to. The hearing where I have to formally testify about the counterfeit ring happens 3 days later in a chamber I've never had reason to enter. High ceiling, long table, 6 guild officials who look at everyone in the room like they're deciding whether to trust the furniture. I'm wearing the same coat I wore the day Felix fired me. It's clean. It's also patched at the elbow and 2 years out of cut, and I notice every official at that table notice it within the first 10 seconds. A woman near the end of the table doesn't bother hiding her opinion. Younger than the others, sharp-eyed, dressed the way people dress when they've never once had to think about the cost of dressing well. "You're the appraiser who identified the goods," she says. Not a question. Her tone makes it sound like an accusation. I am Evelyn Cross. She doesn't offer a hand. My father chairs this guild. He asked me to observe today's proceedings. I've heard your name twice in 1 week, which is unusual for someone who isn't a licensed member of this institution. I'm aware I'm not licensed. Then explain to this committee how you identified concealed counterfeit goods with enough precision to secure 2 convictions, using methods you've declined to disclose to anyone who's asked. The room goes quiet in the way rooms go quiet when someone's trying to catch you in something. I could tell her about the loop. I could tell her about the gold lines and the numbers that hover over things and the way I've known things I shouldn't be able to know since a piece of broken glass cut my thumb. I don't, because I don't know her, and because something in the back of my mind, the same cold, calculating part that told me the vase was a fake before I'd finished forming the thought, tells me this isn't the room to say it in. I have an eye for materials and craftsmanship, I say. I've spent my life around appraisal work. I saw what I saw. That's not an explanation. That's a deflection. It's the only one I've got today. She holds my gaze a beat too long, the kind of look that's cataloging me for later rather than accepting the answer now. This committee will note the assistance provided, she says finally, to the table rather than to me, and reserve judgment on the methodology. She leaves before the session officially closes. I watch her go and think, not for the first time this week, that this city has a great many people whose full-time job is deciding whether I'm telling the truth. Outside the hearing chamber, an old face from the market stops me before I've made it 10 steps. Dorian? Corin used to run the stall next to Tarn's back entrance, the kind of man who nodded at me for 2 years without ever learning my name because I wasn't worth the effort of remembering. He's squinting now, like the coat and the guild chamber behind me don't add up to someone he recognizes. Corin, good to see you. You're testifying? In there? He looks past me at the doors like they might explain something. Heard Tarn threw you out. Heard you were done in this trade. Heard wrong, I guess. He doesn't have anything to say to that, so he says something about the weather and moves on, and I keep walking, and somewhere in my chest, something small and mean and satisfied settles into place. It's not much. It's a man who used to look through me actually looking at me. It'll do for now. That evening, I count what's left after the bounty split and the market case. And it's the first time in my life the number in front of me feels like it could turn into something instead of just covering what's already owed. I lay it out the way Dan taught me to think about it when he explained how the dust catchers budget a job, what I have, what it costs, what I get, what's left, what I have. Enough, for the first time, to be a real decision instead of a survival decision. The coat is the easy half of it, a proper one, cut for someone appearing in front of guild officials and clients who judge a man's competence by his tailoring before they've heard him speak a word. It costs more than I'm comfortable spending, and I spend it anyway, because Evelyn Cross's face when she looked at my elbow patch is going to bother me until I fix it. The harder half is the cellar. My father kept a storage space under the shop that used to be his, before it became someone else's failed venture, and then an empty lot with a locked door nobody's bothered to clear out. I still have the key. I've had it in my coat pocket, my old coat pocket, since the week he died, and I never once went down there because going down there meant admitting the space was as empty as everything else he left behind. It isn't. It's just neglected. Stone walls, a door that still locks, more room than I need right now, and exactly the kind of room I'll need eventually if this work keeps going the way it's going. A place that's mine, not rented, not borrowed from a team that might not keep me past probation. I put down what I have. Coat, first month securing the lease on the cellar, and what's left afterward is close enough to nothing that I feel it the moment I hand the coin over. That's most of what you earned this week, Dan says, when I mention it in passing, in the tone of a man doing arithmetic he finds mildly alarming on someone else's behalf. I know. You could have kept the reserve, bought the coat, skipped the cellar. I could have. I think about the broken drawer sitting in my rented room, about a workshop 2 towns over still turning out lies with a craftsman's precision, about a name that isn't mine yet to clear. I'm not going to be doing this out of a rented room forever. Better to start building somewhere that's actually mine while I can still afford the start of it. Dan doesn't argue. He just makes a note, the way he makes a note of everything, and I go home with almost nothing in my pocket and a key to a door that's finally, for the first time since my father died, worth opening. The Halvern estate sale is the kind of event I've read about in my father's old ledgers and never once expected to attend as anything other than staff. Marble floors, a string quartet, more silver on the refreshment table than most people see in a lifetime. Arya gets us in as consultants for the house, a formality mostly, since the estate's own appraisers have already certified everything on offer. Stand near me, look competent, say nothing unless I ask you to, she says, adjusting the collar of my coat like she's dressing a soldier for inspection. This crowd doesn't know us yet. Let's keep it that way as long as possible. It doesn't stay that way past the second hour. There's a painting, a landscape, minor school, priced modestly compared to the rest of the collection, hanging near a window where the light catches it well enough to make the brushwork look convincing to anyone who hasn't spent the last month learning to see past convincing. I glance at it out of habit while Arya talks logistics with the estate's steward, and the gold lines settle over the canvas and tell me the paint is younger than the frame by at least 80 years. That one's wrong, I say quiet to Arya alone. Which one? The landscape. Frame's genuine old money probably came from the original collection. Canvas is recent. Someone repainted it into an old frame and let the frame do the talking. She doesn't ask me to prove it. She walks straight to the estate's head appraiser, a stately man with 3 medals from guild service pinned to his coat, and asks him, in front of 6 guests, to take another look at the landscape. He doesn't want to. Arya doesn't let him not want to, and within 10 minutes he's standing in front of the painting with a magnifying glass and a growing look of horror, because the canvas fibers under the frame edge don't match anything from the period at all. By the time the room finishes murmuring about it, half the guests have heard secondhand that some unlicensed nobody caught what 3 medals missed. I don't get named directly that night, I get named by morning. By the second morning, 3 separate people I've never met stop me on the street to ask if I'm the one who found the fake at the Halvern sale. By the end of the week, someone started calling me the new appraiser in conversations I'm not present for, and the name follows me into rooms before I do. I'm not built for this part. Finding the fake felt like solving something. Being talked about like a novelty at every dinner table in the merchant district feels like standing in a spotlight I didn't ask anyone to point at me. Get used to it, Arya says, when I mention it, or don't. Either way, it's happening. The mockery arrives at the next event, a smaller gathering hosted by one of the city's collecting families, where I'm brought along less as a consultant and more, I suspect, as something for Arya's reputation to stand next to, so you're the one everyone's whispering about. The woman who says it is young, dressed in a way that makes my new coat look like a costume by comparison, and entirely unbothered about saying it loud enough for the room to hear. Lucia report. My father's spent 30 years building a reputation in this trade, and apparently a former crate carrier can undo someone else's in an afternoon with a look. I didn't undo anyone's reputation. I looked at a painting. You looked at a painting in front of witnesses who matter, which is the entire point, isn't it? Luck reads very well in a crowded room. It wasn't luck. Everyone says that. She looks me over, not unkindly, more the way a buyer looks over goods she hasn't decided are worth the asking price. Breeding tells in this trade eventually. We'll see how long yours holds. She walks off before I can answer, which I decide is probably for the best, because nothing I could say would land the way I want it to. Later, in a private room 3 doors down, Lucia stands very still while her father counts coin into an envelope for a man she doesn't recognize and doesn't ask about. Just a service fee, her father says when she asks anyway, and she lets it go. The way she's let a dozen things like it go over the years without examining why the sums always seem larger than the services described. I don't see any of that. I only see her walk away, certain I've made an enemy of someone with more social weight than I currently know what to do with. Dan finds me near the refreshment table, holding a glass of something I haven't touched, watching the room the way you watch a fire you're not sure is contained. You did well tonight, he says. The painting was a good catch. Doesn't feel like it. It rarely does, the first few times. He glances around the room before lowering his voice. I've been going back through guild auction records for the past year, cross-referencing pieces sold as rare finds against what little documentation exists on their provenance, and too many of them appear from nowhere. No prior ownership record, no gallery history, nothing but a seller's word and a convincing surface. And then they sell for enormous sums to buyers who don't ask hard questions. The Halvern landscape isn't an isolated case, it's a pattern. Someone's flooding the market. Someone's flooding the market on purpose and doing it well enough that it's taken this long for anyone with the right eyes to notice. He says the last part looking directly at me, and I understand, not for the first time, that whatever I found by accident in a shop I no longer work for might be bigger than one bad vase. Felix finds me an hour later, which I should have expected the moment I saw the guest list included half the city's dealers. The new appraiser, he says, loud enough to turn heads, the same tone he used the day he fired me. Word is, you're stealing work you didn't earn. Word is half of what you find was already known and you just say it louder than everyone else. Is that the word? Or is that you? I trained you. Everything you know about this trade, you learned carrying my crates. You trained me to lie to clients about provenance. I learned the rest on my own. It lands harder than I mean it to, in front of exactly the kind of crowd where it can't be unsaid. Someone near the back, one of the guests who saw the Halvern landscape unmasked firsthand, laughs, short and sharp, and the laugh spreads before Felix can recover his footing. You'll fail, he says, quieter now, the crowd's attention already sliding away from him toward more interesting conversation. This isn't a trade for lucky guesses. It's connections and money and a name people trust. You have none of that. I have 2 out of 3 now, I say, working on the 3rd. He doesn't have an answer for that. He leaves the gathering not long after, and I watch him go and feel less satisfaction than I expected. Because unmasking a man in public twice doesn't undo what he did to a drawer that used to hold my father's calibration weights. And it doesn't slow down whoever's actually flooding this market with lies dressed as history. I take a hired carriage home that night instead of walking, the first time in my life I've paid for the convenience instead of needing it, and it feels strange in a way I don't examine too closely. A small, ordinary comfort that would have been unthinkable 8 months ago, arriving at exactly the moment I'm starting to understand how much bigger the problem actually is. The city already has a name for me. I haven't decided yet whether I've earned it, and somewhere out there, in workshops and back rooms I haven't found yet, someone is still turning lies into gold, entirely unbothered by a crate carrier's growing reputation. That's the part that keeps me awake, not the attention. The knowing there's more of it than I've found, and less time to find it than I'd like. The tavern aria picks for celebrating isn't fancy, which is the point. Low ceiling, sawdust floor, a bartender who's known Rita long enough to pour her usual before she asks for it. To the new appraiser, Dan says, raising his cup, deadpan enough that I can't tell if he's mocking the name or me. Don't call me that. Everyone else is. You don't have to be everyone else. Rita snorts into her drink. It's the closest thing to a laugh I've gotten out of her in 3 weeks of working together, and I decide to count it as a win. You're stiff, Arya tells me, kicking my boot under the table. Whole night people fawning over you, and you look like you're waiting for the roof to fall in. Habit. Bad one. You're allowed to enjoy a win before the next disaster shows up. Statistically, Dan says, the next disaster is usually closer than people think. Nobody asked you for statistics, Dan. Someone should, given how often you ignore them. They go back and forth like that for a while. Dan dry and precise, Rita cutting in with something short and sharper, Arya refereeing badly on purpose because she enjoys watching them argue more than she enjoys stopping it. I sit back and let it happen around me, and for the length of one evening, in a tavern that smells like spilled ale and old wood smoke, none of it feels like work. It feels like the kind of table I haven't sat at since before my father died. It doesn't last. Nothing this new ever does. But for an hour, it's enough. The cellar under my father's old shop takes most of what I've saved to make livable, and even then, livable is generous. I clear it out myself over 3 days. Broken shelving, a decade of dust, a section of wall that's more crumble than stone. The mason I hire isn't cheap, but he's good, and he doesn't ask why a young man with a guild reputation and no license wants a private room strong enough to survive a determined break-in. You want it to just hold, or you want it to hold and keep people out, he asks, on the first day. Both. I can't afford both yet. Then we do the door properly and the walls later. Door's what actually stops someone. What I have covers the door, a decent lock, and the barest sketch of a ward. Nothing elaborate, nothing that would stop a determined professional, just enough to make an opportunist think twice. What it costs eats through nearly everything I've earned since the Halvern sale. What I get is a room with a door that locks, 4 walls that mostly hold, and a workbench where I can finally examine pieces without borrowing space from Arya's team or working out of a rented room that was never built for it. What's left afterward is not much. I don't mind. For the first time since my father died, there's a door in this city that opens to a room that's mine. The break-in happens on the 9th night. I'm not there when it starts. I'm 2 streets over, finishing a late consultation for a client who wants a family heirloom appraised before a wedding. But Corin is the retired doorman I've hired part-time to sit the cellar overnight for a fraction of what real security costs, because a fraction is all I can pay. I hear about it from Rita, who happens to be walking the same street on her way back from her own errand, sees the cellar door standing open at an hour it shouldn't be, and doesn't wait for backup before going in. By the time I get there, it's mostly over. 2 men gone before I arrive, professional enough to know when a job's failed and not worth finishing. Corin's on the floor near the workbench, a gash along his ribs deep enough that Rita's already got pressure on it with torn cloth. Her crossbow discarded on the ground beside her because there was no time to reload between the first strike and the second. They knew what they were looking for, she says, not looking up from Corin. Didn't touch the cheap stock on the shelf. Went straight for the locked case. The locked case holds a client's ring, left with me for assessment 2 days ago, worth enough to explain the effort, but not enough, I think, staring at the wreckage of my own front door, to explain how professional the attempt was. Corin, stay with me. Still here, he manages, which is more defiance than reassurance, but I'll take it. Didn't drop the case. Little bastards didn't get it. He held the line on a fraction of a doorman's wage against 2 men who came prepared to break through a ward I couldn't afford to make stronger. I carry that with me the whole walk to the healers, Rita on one side, Corin's weight between us, and it settles somewhere under my ribs that doesn't loosen for days. The healer says he'll live. Says it with the particular caution healers use when they mean probably, and I sit in the hallway outside her room longer than I need to, thinking about a door I built cheap because cheap was what I could afford, and a man who nearly paid full price for that decision. Arya finds me there near midnight. You want to report it to the guild, she says. Not quite a question. I think about it seriously for the first time since Rita's message reached me. The guild has real investigators, real resources, the kind of institutional weight that could actually track down 2 professional men in a city this size. Reporting it means answers I might not get on my own. It also means questions. Who I am, what I'm keeping in a private cellar worth a professional break-in, why a man who left the guild's employ 8 months ago as an unlicensed crate carrier suddenly has enemies capable of hiring competent thieves. Evelyn Cross is already circling those questions without an incident to justify asking them louder. No, I say. Why not? Because whoever sent those 2 isn't going to be caught by a guild report. They'll be caught by us finding out who they work for before they try again. I look at the closed door to Corin's room, and because I don't trust the guild to keep this quiet, and quiet is the only thing keeping Corin's family from finding out how close this actually was. Arya doesn't argue. She's quiet for a moment, the kind of quiet that means she's recalculating something. Then we build it properly, she says. Not a door and a wish. Real wards, real security. If people are willing to send professionals after a locked case, that cellar's not a workroom anymore. It's a target. I can't afford real wards, not yet. She looks at me the way she looked at me the night of the vault test, like she's recalculating what I'm worth to the crew and landing somewhere higher than before. But you're going to be able to, soon enough, if tonight's any indication of how seriously people are starting to take you. Until then, we cover the gap. I don't like owing anyone, I like the alternative less. I nod, and we sit in that hallway together until the healer comes out to tell us Corin's stable, and somewhere in that waiting, the cellar under my father's old shop stops being a workroom in my head and starts being something I have to defend, the same way he once had something worth defending and lost it anyway. I don't intend to lose mine the same way. The trail from Corin's ribs to a name takes 11 days of Dan cross-referencing shipping manifests against guild appraisal records, and it ends at a man named Ovid Pell, a licensed evaluator. 22 years with the guild, the kind of unremarkable career that never draws attention because that's exactly what it's built to do. He's been undervaluing estate pieces for at least 3 years, Dan says, spreading the paperwork across my workbench. Careful of the ring case still sitting in the corner with its lock replaced twice since the break-in. Family brings in an inheritance. Pell certifies it as minor stock, buys it himself for a fraction of its worth, or points the family toward a buyer who happens to pay him a finder's fee afterward. Nothing illegal on paper, just consistently, suspiciously wrong. Wrong for 3 years and nobody noticed. Nobody was looking. Undervaluing draws less attention than overvaluing. No angry buyer feels cheated. Just a lot of quietly poorer families who never think to ask why the appraisal came in low. And the break-in? Guessing. But if Pell's part of something larger and word reached that particular something that a new appraiser was getting sharp enough to notice discrepancies nobody else catches, sending 2 men after a locked case in your cellar starts looking less like theft and more like a warning. I think about the shard of clay pottery in the vault, glowing gold at the edges while everything cheap around it stayed dark. I think about the vase, 11 months old, wearing 2,000 years of paint. Somewhere underneath all of it, a pattern's forming that I don't like the shape of yet. We bring the case to a guild committee session, the same chamber where Evelyn Cross first accused me of deflection instead of explanation. This time, I'm not the one under question. Pell doesn't confess easily. He's had 22 years to build a story for exactly this moment, and he tells it well. A run of honest mistakes, nothing more. The kind of thing that happens to any evaluator working under pressure. It's convincing, right up until Dan lays 3 years of consistent undervaluation next to 3 years of Pell's private purchases at those exact undervalued prices, in his own hand, in ledgers he never expected anyone outside his own household to see. You could have reported irregularities quietly, Evelyn says, from her seat near the end of the table, and I notice she's watching me as much as she's watching Pell. Instead, you brought this to a public session. Quiet didn't stop him from doing it for 3 years, I say. I don't see why it would stop the next one. She doesn't answer that directly, but she doesn't argue it either, and something in her expression shifts. Not warmth, nothing that generous, but a flicker of the same calculation I saw the first day she called my methods a deflection, like she's updating a ledger of her own. Pell loses his license before the session ends. It won't undo 3 years of families quietly cheated, but it's a start, and a start is more than this trade's had in longer than I've been alive to notice it needed one. She's waiting for me outside the chamber, uninvited and unbothered about it, dressed like she's never once had to consider the cost of anything she's wearing. You're hard to find alone, she says. Your team treats you like something fragile. They treat me like something worth keeping intact. There's a difference. Marla Dins. She doesn't offer a hand, just a name, delivered flat and quick, like she's used to people needing convincing before they trust it. I hear things. Ports, back rooms, whoever's buying what nobody's supposed to be selling. You're the one who caught Pell, and Pell's the kind of small fish that usually swims near bigger ones. What do you want? Same thing you want, to know who's actually running this. I've got debts to people I'd rather not keep owing, and knowledge is the only currency I've got left to trade. You want ears in places your team can't go, I've got them. Price is protection, and enough coin that I'm not tempted to sell what I hear to whoever pays better. I look at her a moment too long, the way Arya looked at me outside Tarn's shop what feels like a lifetime ago instead of a few months. I don't have the gold lines to check whether she's telling the truth. The system reads objects, not people, though I've started to wonder lately whether that's entirely true. But something in how directly she states her price instead of dressing it up convinces me more than a polished promise would have. I can't pay you what a bigger operation would. I didn't ask what a bigger operation pays. I asked what you'd pay for someone in your corner who already knows the streets you're about to start walking into. We settle on terms in less time than it took Pell to build his story. She's not part of the team the way Arya, Dan, and Rita are. She's something else, a first hire, the first person besides the healer and a mason and a doorman with a scar now on his ribs that I'm paying out of my own pocket instead of a shared bounty. I move out of the room above the tannery 2 weeks later. It's not much. 2 rooms instead of 1, a landlord who doesn't smell like leather curing, a street that doesn't flood every time it rains hard. It's the first place I've lived that isn't chosen because it's the cheapest option available, and signing the lease feels stranger than it should. Like I'm still waiting for someone to tell me I've made a mistake I can't afford. My old landlord finds out before I've finished moving the last crate. He's standing in the doorway of the tannery building when I come to collect what's left of my things, arms crossed. The same expression he wore the week he threatened to change the locks over 40 coins. Heard you're renting on Miller Street now, he says. Nice building, good tenants, news travels fast. You paid every debt you owed me on time these last months. Wish more of my tenants did that. He says it like it costs him something to admit. If things ever go sideways for you again, room's still yours. No hard feelings. Appreciate it. I don't think I'll need it. No, he says, looking me over once, coat and all. Don't suppose you will? I don't feel triumphant walking away. I expected to. Instead, I feel something quieter. Not vindication, just the plain fact of a life that stopped being an emergency every single week, settling into something that might, if I'm careful, become ordinary. That night, in the cellar, I lay out what's left after the new lease and Marla's first payment, and the number is smaller than I'd like. Same as it's been every time since I started building something instead of just surviving it. Dan stops by to drop off Pell's confiscated ledgers for safekeeping and finds me staring at the workbench doing the arithmetic for the 3rd time. Tight month, he says. Every month's been tight since the vault. I keep thinking it'll stop being tight and it just moves the number where the tightness happens. That's what building something looks like, from the inside. He sets the ledgers down carefully, out of habit more than necessity. You're not surviving anymore, Dorian. You're investing. It feels the same in the moment. It isn't. I think about the door on the cellar, still not strong enough, still on the list of things I can't quite afford yet. I think about Pell's 22 years of quiet theft, about a workshop 2 towns over I still haven't found, about a name, my father's name, still sitting exactly where Felix Tarn left it 8 months ago. Feels the same, I agree. I'll take your word that it isn't. Bren Ashgate comes recommended by the same mason who fitted the cellar door, an old man who spent 40 years laying wards into stone and outlived most of the people who used to hire him. Your father bought a ward stone for me once, he says. The first day he walks the cellar, running a hand along the wall like he's reading it. Small commission, protective seal for a case he was carrying something valuable in. Good customer, paid on time, asked smart questions, didn't pretend to know more than he did. You knew him? Knew of him. Everyone in this trade did before. He doesn't finish the sentence, and I don't make him. You've got his eye for material, from what I hear around the guild halls. Let's see if you've got his patience too, because this work doesn't go quickly. It doesn't. 3 weeks of Bren working stone and old script into the walls. Real wards this time instead of the barest sketch I could afford after the break-in. A proper alarm woven into the door itself instead of a lock any determined professional could work around. What it costs is more than everything I've earned since Pell's hearing combined. What it gets me is a room that isn't a target waiting to be hit twice. Something the crew, without much ceremony, has started calling the bunker, because that's what it is now. Not a workroom, a base. Marla starts calling it that too, the one time she visits. Standing in the doorway, looking at the fresh ward work with an expression somewhere between impressed and suspicious of anything that expensive. Whoever sent those 2 men after Corin, she says, isn't going to like this. Good. Dan finds the thread 3 days after Bren finishes the last ward. He spent weeks going backward through auction records, guild archives, old newspaper columns nobody's touched in years. chasing the pattern of forgeries flooding the market to whatever source keeps feeding it. He shows up at the bunker late, papers under his arm, the particular stillness in his face that means he's found something he's not sure he wants to have found. 5 years ago, he says, laying it out on the workbench, a piece came up for private sale. The Tears of the First Warden. You know the name. I know the name. Everyone in this trade knows the name, a relic old enough to have 3 separate origin stories, valuable enough that owning it outright would set a family up for generations. It was set to change hands for an amount that would have made whoever sold it one of the wealthiest private collectors in the region, Dan continues. The buyer had already put down a deposit. Then, days before the sale closed, an independent evaluator examined the piece and declared it a forgery. Expertly made, old materials repurposed into a new shape, but a forgery all the same. The sale collapsed. The evaluator's reputation collapsed with it not long after on accusations that he'd faked his own credentials to extort a bribe from the seller for a false verdict. I don't need him to say the name. I already know it the way I know my own hands, my father, your father. Dan doesn't soften it, which I appreciate more than I have words for right now. The accusation never held up to real scrutiny, but it didn't need to. It only needed to hold long enough to end his license and his standing. He died 8 months later, officially of drink and disgrace. And unofficially, I've spent 3 days finding out who benefited from that sale collapsing quietly instead of publicly, and who benefited from your father never getting the chance to clear his name. He turns a page toward me. Shipping manifests, ownership records, a chain of holding companies that all lead, eventually, to the same signature. The Tears never resurfaced after the sale collapsed. It went underground, into a network that's been feeding forged relics into legitimate markets ever since, laundering real stolen history through fake provenance. Your vase, Pell's undervalued estates, the Halvern landscape, all of it runs back to the same operation. Whose name is on the manifests? Tarn Shipping Interests. Guido Tarn's, specifically, Felix's father. He lets that sit a moment before finishing it. This isn't a father protecting his son's shop reputation, Dorian. This is a criminal network with a legitimate business as its front, and your father found the one thread that could have unraveled it 5 years before you ever picked up his loop. The bunker is quiet enough that I can hear the new wards humming faintly in the walls, the sound of money I don't have spent on a room built to keep something like this out. It didn't occur to me until this exact moment that the something might already have a name and a history with my family older than my own memory of learning this trade. Evelyn comes to the bunker 3 nights later, unannounced, in clothes plain enough that I almost don't recognize her without the guild formality she usually wears like armor. I shouldn't be here, she says before I've fully opened the door. If anyone from the guild sees me walking into an unlicensed appraiser's private cellar at this hour, I'll spend the next month explaining myself to my father. Then why come? She hands me a folder instead of answering directly. Inside are internal guild records, appraisal certifications, licensing decisions, correspondence between committee members that was never meant to leave the chairman's office. It takes me less than a minute of reading to understand what I'm looking at. Pell isn't isolated, she says while I read. There's a pattern of licenses granted, certifications overlooked, committee votes that consistently favor certain sellers over years, going back further than I want to admit. I started pulling these records after your hearing, telling myself I was checking whether you were a fraud. I kept pulling them because I couldn't stop finding things that didn't make sense. Does your father know you have these? Her silence answers before she does. My father's name is on some of the approvals. I don't know yet if that means he's complicit or if it means someone's been using his signature without his full understanding of what he was signing. I need to know which, and I can't ask him directly without warning whoever's actually responsible that someone's looking. That's a dangerous thing to hand a man you accused of deflection 3 months ago. I know exactly how dangerous it is. She meets my eyes, steady despite everything the admission costs her. I'm handing it to you because you're the only person in this city with no reason to protect my father if he's guilty, and enough reason to protect the truth if he isn't. I take the folder. It feels heavier than paper should. Bren doesn't come to check the wards the next morning, which isn't like him. He's never missed a scheduled inspection in 3 weeks of work. Not once. Not even the morning it rained hard enough to flood half the lower district. I find him at the cellar door an hour later, when he still hasn't answered at his own home, and Marla, sent to check, comes back with her face gone the particular gray of someone who's seen something she can't unsee. He's lying just outside the bunker entrance. No sign of a struggle, no sign of theft, nothing taken, nothing disturbed. The wards he spent 3 weeks building still humming exactly as they should be. Just an old man who spent 40 years protecting other people's valuables, left where I'd be certain to find him, close enough to my own door that there's no mistaking what it means. A warning doesn't usually come this quiet. It doesn't usually come this final either. Arya arrives not long after, takes one look, and doesn't say anything for a long moment. Just puts a hand on my shoulder, the same hand that clapped it once in celebration after the vault, and lets the weight of it sit there instead of trying to fill the silence with something that won't help. He wasn't part of this, I say, finally. He built walls. That's all he did. He built walls that mattered enough for someone to want him gone, Dan says quietly. That's what part of this means now. I stand there a long time, looking at a man who trusted me enough to tell me my own father bought a wardstone from him once, who called it good work and meant it. Now lying still on stone, he strengthened with his own hands to keep the people he cared about safe. It didn't keep him safe. Nothing about this trade, I'm starting to understand, keeps anyone entirely safe once they get close enough to see what's actually underneath it. This isn't a story about forged vases anymore, I say, to no one and everyone at once. No, Arya agrees. It stopped being that the day they came after Corin. We just didn't want to say it out loud yet. I look at the folder Evelyn left with me, at Dan's shipping manifest still spread across the workbench, at the wards Bren built with the last 3 weeks of his life, humming steady and useless around a door he'll never walk through again. Then let's stop not saying it, I say. Tell me everything you both know about Guido Tarn. We bury Bren on a gray morning with a small crowd, a handful of masons who trained under him, Corin leaning on a cane he still needs some days, the 4 of us standing at the edge of it because none of us knew him long enough to stand at the center. His daughter thanks me for covering the arrangements. I don't tell her the wards he died beside are the reason he's not going home tonight. Some truths don't help the people carrying them. I go back to the bunker that evening because staying away from it feels like letting them win something I'm not willing to give up. And because Dan wants to walk through everything we know about Guido Tarn while it's still fresh enough to organize. Legitimate face is portside shipping, Dan says, spreading a chart of Tarn holdings across the workbench, warehouses, a fleet of modest trade vessels, a controlling share in 2 smaller shipping concerns that look on paper like nothing worth a second glance. Underneath it, best I can reconstruct, is a network moving forged relics into legal markets and moving looted originals out to private buyers who don't ask questions. Been running at least 5 years, probably longer. Your father found one thread of it and pulled, and it killed him for pulling it. It ended his career for pulling it. What killed him afterward is harder to prove, but I don't believe in coincidences that convenient anymore. Dan taps the chart. Felix runs the visible end, the shop, the social respectability, the buying and selling that keeps the family name looking clean. Guido runs what's underneath. I don't know yet how deep it goes past him. We have enough to bring to the guild. We have enough to bring suspicion to the guild, not enough to survive Guido's lawyers or the half of the merchant council he's quietly funded over the years. We move too early, we lose the case and paint a target on everyone who helped build it. I think about Bren, still cooling in a grave he didn't earn, and about how patient I don't feel like being. The attempt on me comes 2 nights later, walking back from the bunker to the flat on Miller Street, down a stretch of road I've walked a dozen times without incident. 2 men, professional the way the break-in was professional, no wasted movement, no hesitation, closing from either side of the street at the same moment like they've done this before and expect it to end the same way it usually does. I don't have time to think. I have time to reach for the decoy Dan insisted I start carrying 2 weeks ago, over my own objections that it was an unnecessary expense. It's an ugly little thing, a cracked pendant, dull stone, worth nothing to anyone who doesn't know what's woven into it. I close my hand around it on instinct the moment the first man lunges and the world does something sideways and violent. My body wrenched a full stride to the left a half second before a blade passes through exactly where I was standing. Fake trades places with the real thing when it's struck, Dan told me, handing it over, the same dry tone he uses for everything. Cost me most of a month's earnings and half my patience with the enchanter who made it. Don't lose it before you need it. I didn't believe I'd need it. I owe him an apology. I don't have time to give right now. The 2 men recover fast, adjusting to a target that moved when it shouldn't have been able to. and I'm still off balance from the wrench of it when Rita's crossbow bolt takes the first one in the shoulder from a rooftop I didn't know she was watching. She'd been shadowing me the last 3 nights without telling me, on Arya's orders, because Arya stopped trusting this city's streets the moment Bren didn't answer his door. The second man runs the moment his partner goes down. We don't catch him. We're not supposed to. Not tonight. Not against men this careful. But I walk back to the bunker with my pulse still hammering and the certainty finally, undeniably settled that Guido Tarn knows exactly who I am and has decided I'm worth the effort of removing. Lucia Report finds me the next morning before I've properly slept, standing in the doorway of the bunker with an expression I haven't seen on her before. Not the polished condescension from the Halvern sale, something closer to fear wearing formal clothes. I heard about last night, she says. The whole merchant district's heard by now. I need to tell you something before I lose the nerve to say it out loud. Say it. My family's been paying Guido Tarn for 11 years. Not investment, not partnership, protection money, dressed up as a business arrangement so my father could pretend it wasn't extortion. Every season, a sum, and in return our shipments go through his warehouses without complications. I found the ledgers 2 years ago. I never said anything because saying something meant admitting my family's respectability was purchased from a criminal, and I decided that was easier to live with quietly than to face publicly. Why tell me now? Because they tried to kill you last night for looking too closely at something my family's known about for over a decade and chose to keep paying instead of exposing. Her voice doesn't shake, though I can see what it costs her to keep it steady. I'm done being quiet about it. She makes good on that within the week at a gathering of the Merchant Council I'm not invited to and hear about secondhand. Standing in front of the same social circle that laughed at her Halvern insult months ago, naming names, dates, sums paid. Watching men who spent years pretending not to notice their own complicity go pale in front of their peers. It costs her standing she'll spend years rebuilding. She does it anyway. Your father's going to disown you for this, Dan says when word reaches us. My father's going to have worse things to worry about than disowning me, Lucia says. And there's something in the way she says it that tells me she's already made her peace with whatever comes next. We sit in the bunker that night doing arithmetic that has nothing to do with coin and everything to do with survival. We need better security here, Rita says. Last night proves the street isn't safe. This place barely is. We need more evidence, Dan counters. Lucia's testimony helps, but it's hearsay against a family with lawyers on retainer. We need something that puts Guido's own signature on something undeniable. And that means resources into finding it. Informants, records, someone willing to talk from inside his operation. Both cost money we don't currently have in the amounts either of you are describing, Arya says, and looks at me. Your call. It's your bunker, your name on the target. I lay out what we have, same as I've laid out every decision since the vault. What's in reserve, what each direction costs, what we lose if we guess wrong. Full defense buys us safety and buys us nothing toward finishing this. Full offense moves us closer to Guido and leaves the bunker, and everyone in it, exposed the way it was exposed the night Bren died outside its door. Split it, I say finally, half into security here, enough that Rita's not lying awake worrying about the walls. Half into whatever Dan needs to find something that survives a courtroom. It leaves us thin on both sides. I don't see a version of this where we're not thin on something. Nobody argues. There isn't a better answer sitting anywhere in the room, only a worse one dressed up as safety, and none of us have the patience left tonight to pretend otherwise. I go to sleep that night with the decoy pendant still in my pocket, cracked and ugly and worth more than gold, and dream for the first time in weeks of my father's workshop instead of his death. The two of us at his bench, him showing me how to hold a loop steady, years before either of us understood what it would eventually cost or what it might someday be worth enough to finish. The Crown's letter arrives sealed with wax I've never seen before, delivered by a courier who won't say who sent him beyond the palace and leaves before I can ask a second question. Arya reads it twice before handing it to Dan. They want us to clear the sundered deep. Full royal commission, which means full royal pay, which means someone at the palace finally noticed the deep's been sitting unclaimed for a century because everyone who's tried has died in it. What's down there? I ask. A drowned city, Dan says, already pulling references from his own shelves. Pre-guild, pre-kingdom in parts of it. Artifacts wash in from collapsed sites across the continent through old tunnel systems nobody's mapped completely. And at the center of it, according to every reliable source I've found, something called the Founder's Heart. a relic capable of blessing a territory or unmaking it, depending entirely on whose hands it ends up in. And Guido's people want it too. Guido's people want everything valuable in this kingdom. The Deep's just the largest single prize left unclaimed. Dan looks up from his notes. If we get there first, the Crown holds it and the Syndicate loses the single biggest score they've been circling for years. If they get there first, they won't, Arya says. We're going. Marla shows up at the bunker the morning we're set to leave, dressed for travel, a bag already over her shoulder before anyone's asked her to come. You're not part of the crew for this, I say. It's a ruin, not a street. Different kind of dangerous. I'm not going into the ruin with you. She sets the bag down like the matter's settled. I'm going to spend the time you're underground getting closer to Tarn's people topside. Word's spreading that Guido's sending his own team after the same prize. I want to know when they leave, how many, and what they're carrying before they're close enough to matter. That's not information gathering. That's walking into their camp. It's the only way to get information that's actually worth having. She meets my eyes, steady in the way she's been steady since the day she named her price outside a guild hearing. You do the part only you can do. Let me do the part only I can do. I don't like it. I don't have a better answer either, and there's no time left to argue for one. The sundered deep swallows sound the moment we descend past the collapsed sea gate that used to be a harbor entrance centuries ago, before whatever cataclysm dragged half a city under the waterline and left the rest hollow and dry in air pockets that shouldn't exist and somehow do. Rita leads with a lantern that burns steadier than fire has any right to this far underground. Dan reads the walls like a second language, old script carved into stone that hasn't seen daylight in longer than the kingdom's been a kingdom. Arya's hands find seals along the passage that would have killed anyone without her particular gift, unraveling them one careful motion at a time. I find the wrong turns before we take them. Every corridor splits into paths that look identical, and half of them lead to nothing but collapsed stone or worse, and the gold lines are the only thing telling us which half is which. At a cost that starts 3 hours in, to feel less like a tool and more like a toll. You're bleeding, Rita says, somewhere past the fourth junction, nodding at my face without stopping. I touch my upper lip. My hand comes away red. I'm fine. You said that at the third junction too. I'll say it again at the fifth if I have to. I wipe my face on my sleeve and keep walking, because stopping means someone else has to guess, and guessing down here means dying. The chamber at the heart of the deep holds 1,000 caskets, identical in size and shape, stacked floor to ceiling in rows that stretch further than the lantern light reaches. One of these is real, Arya says. The rest kill on touch. How do you know that? Because that's how every trap in this ruin has worked so far, and I've stopped expecting the pattern to break in our favor. I close my eyes. The strain by now is a physical thing, a pressure behind my eyes that's been building since the first wrong turn. And opening the gold lines across 1,000 objects at once feels less like sight and more like something tearing slowly along a seam that was never meant to hold this much weight. Most of the room reads as nothing, cold, hollow, waiting. One casket near the center of the fourth row glows faint and steady where everything around it stays dark. That one. My voice comes out thinner than I want it to. Fourth row, center. I can't check a second time. If I'm wrong, you're not wrong, Arya says, already moving toward it, and I want to tell her how close I am to certain instead of how close I am to right, and don't have the strength left to explain the difference before she's lifted it clear of the shelf without incident. I go down to one knee the moment the casket's confirmed safe, blood running freely now, my vision narrowing at the edges the way it did once before and never this badly. Rita's hand catches my shoulder before I fully drop. Enough, she says. Whatever's left in that room, it's not worth what you're paying for it. I don't argue. I don't have anything left to argue with. The final chamber holds the Guardian, a golem carved from stone that predates the city around it, standing dormant until the casket crosses its threshold, at which point it rises with a grinding weight that shakes dust loose from a ceiling that's held for 1,000 years. Arya tries the seal along its chest first, the same technique that's carried her through every ward in this ruin, and it doesn't yield, not resistant the way stone resists force, but indifferent. Like the golem isn't defended so much as waiting for something Arya's particular gift was never built to give it. It's not a lock, Dan says, backing away from an attempted translation that's telling him nothing useful. I don't think this is a puzzle of language either. I look at it. Really look, past the exhaustion, past the blood I haven't wiped off my chin in several minutes now, and the gold lines settle over the golem differently than they've settled over anything else down here. Not an object. Not quite alive either. Something built to ask a question and wait, patiently, for as long as it takes someone to answer honestly. It's not a guardian, I say. It's a test. It wants to know if whoever's holding the heart understands what it's actually worth. We know what it's worth, Rita says. That's the entire reason we're down here, not in coin. I step forward, past Arya's outstretched arm, past the point where the golem's shadow falls fully across me. It doesn't care what the heart sells for. It cares whether the person carrying it out understands the difference. I don't know fully what I'm about to say until I'm saying it, that the heart isn't a prize, that it's a responsibility carried on behalf of people who never asked to have their safety weighed against someone else's fortune, that my own father died because he understood that difference and refused to pretend otherwise for a payday. I say all of it out loud, exhausted and bleeding in front of a construct 1,000 years older than my family name, and somewhere in the middle of it, the golem's weight settles back into stillness, and the passage beyond it opens without further resistance. Nobody speaks for a moment. Then Arya lets out a breath I didn't realize she'd been holding and helps me stay upright, and we walk out of the drowned city carrying the one thing in it that was never meant to be sold. We surface at dusk, exhausted, victorious, and I've barely finished drawing a full clean breath of open air before I see Corin waiting at the ruin's entrance with a look on his face that tells me the victory isn't going to feel like one for long. Marla, he says, before I've asked. Word reached the bunker an hour ago. She got close to Tarn's people, same as she said she would. Close enough that they figured out what she was doing. Where is she? Dead, Dorian. He says it plain, no softening, because he's learned by now that softening it doesn't help either of us. Tarn's man, the one they call Garth, the one-eyed one, found her passing information near the docks, left her where she'd be found, same as they left Bren. A message, same as before. I stand there holding a relic that could bless or ruin a kingdom, still bleeding faintly at the lip, and feel the ground under this entire victory shift into something colder. She told me she'd do the part only she could do. I let her because there wasn't a better answer, and there still isn't one, standing here now, except that the better answer should have existed and didn't, and she paid for that absence with her life. Garth, I say, and the name sits in my mouth like something I intend to keep. That's the name, Corin confirms. I look at Arya, at Dan, at Rita, all of them still catching their breath from a ruin that nearly killed us twice over for a prize we're now carrying out safely. And none of that safety feels like enough. Not tonight. Not with Marla's name added to a list that started with Bren and isn't finished growing. Then that's who we're going to find, I say, whatever it costs. Evelyn's documents, Lucia's testimony, and the founder's heart sitting safely in Crown custody give us enough, finally, to move on Guido Tarn directly instead of chasing the edges of his operation. The Crown Inspector, who meets us at the harbor gate 2 nights later, is younger than I expect, sharp-eyed, carrying a warrant that took Dan and Evelyn 3 days of careful maneuvering through guild and palace channels to secure. Warehouse 7, she says, checking a manifest against the shipment records Dan's already handed her, registered as fine art in transit. If your information's accurate, we're about to find considerably more than art inside those crates. It's accurate, Dan says. I've cross-referenced it 4 separate ways. Then let's confirm it a 5th. The crates are stacked 3 high along the warehouse floor, each one stamped with a gallery's name I recognize from a dozen legitimate transactions over the past months. The same gallery. I realize now that supplied the Halvern estate with half its collection. I don't need long with the first crate. The gold lines settle over the painted crest on its lid the moment I'm close enough, and underneath the surface, reading of ordinary export goods, there's a second layer entirely. Objects that don't match their manifest, provenance that doesn't match their history, a weight of true value hidden under a false one the way the Halvern landscape hid new paint under an old frame. This isn't art in transit, I say, loud enough for the inspector to hear clearly. This is stolen provenance being smuggled out under a legitimate cover. I can read the discrepancy in every crate in this row without opening a single lid. That's a serious claim to make without opening one. Open the first, then. I'll tell you what's in the second before you touch it. She does. What's inside doesn't match the manifest in a single detail, exactly as I said it wouldn't, and by the time she's confirmed the second crate against my reading without opening it first, Her expression has shifted from professional skepticism to the particular stillness of someone realizing the case just became much larger than she was briefed for. That's when the warehouse doors slam shut behind us and the lanterns along the far wall go out one by one, and I understand, a half-second too late, that Guido Tarn didn't leave this shipment unguarded. They come from the shadows between the crate stacks, more of them than I expect, moving with the same trained precision as the men who came for me on the street 2 weeks ago. Except this time, there are 8 of them instead of 2, and at the head of the group is a man with a scarred socket where his left eye should be. Moving like violence is a language he's fluent in and everyone else is still learning to speak. Garth, I say. You're the appraiser. He doesn't sound impressed. The one who's been costing my employer money. I expected someone more dangerous. Ask the girl you left at the docks whether I'm dangerous. Something flickers across his ruined face. Not guilt, nothing that decent, closer to recognition, the look of a professional acknowledging a job he remembers doing. She talked more than she should have to people she shouldn't have trusted. Occupational hazard. Arya moves before I can answer that, closing the distance between herself and the nearest of Garth's men with a speed that turns the fight from conversation into motion in a single heartbeat. Her hands finding the seal woven into his armor and unraveling it the same way she's unraveled every ward we've faced together, leaving him staggering, exposed. Easy work for Rita's crossbow finding him a half-second later from somewhere above the crate stacks. Dan's magic unfolds in overlapping layers I don't have time to fully watch. 3 separate effects running at once. Disorienting light, a binding that catches 2 men mid-stride, a ward thrown up around the inspector before a blade meant for her throat can land. He's paying for it visibly, blood at his nose the same way mine runs when I push the system past its comfortable edge, but he doesn't stop. Layering effect over effect until the warehouse floor is a controlled chaos of men who thought this would be easy. I fight the way my father taught me, before either of us understood what it would eventually be for. A blade in my hand, close work, ugly and efficient rather than elegant. But the system gives me something none of them expect. A man swings at me with what should be a killing angle, and I see, a half-second before the blade moves, the gold line tracing a weakness in his grip where an old injury never healed properly. And I redirect instead of block, and he goes down without me needing strength I don't fully have. Garth doesn't underestimate twice. He comes for me directly, fast enough that I barely track the first strike, and it's only the same trick that saved my life on the street, reading the true shape of an attack instead of its surface. The feint, hidden inside the obvious swing, that keeps his blade from finding my ribs instead of my sleeve. You see through everything, he says, circling, unimpressed and calculating in equal measure. Let's see what you do when there's nothing to see through, just speed. He's faster than I am. I know that within the first 3 exchanges, my arm already bleeding from a cut I didn't fully avoid, and I understand, with the same cold clarity that's carried me through every reading since the loop first cut my thumb, that I can't win this on speed or strength. I have exactly one advantage, and it isn't physical. I let him come in close on the next exchange instead of retreating from it, and in the half-second before his blade lands, I see the truth of him the way I saw the truth of the vase, not his stance, not his weapon, but the man underneath it, a professional who's never once lost a fight he respected enough to be afraid of, moving with the total confidence of someone who's never had to imagine failing. I don't fight the confidence. I break it. Marla wasn't scared of you, I say, driving the words in like a blade of their own, right up until the moment you killed her. That's the last thing she got to feel. Not fear, just surprise that a professional needed a knife in the dark for a girl who was never going to fight back. It's not a killing blow. It's a hesitation, a fraction of a second where the total confidence cracks. And a fraction of a second is exactly what I need to close the gap he's kept between us the entire fight and put my father's blade where it needs to go. He goes down hard and doesn't get back up, and I stand over him breathing harder than the exchange itself should account for, feeling considerably less triumphant than I expected to feel about ending the man who ended Marla. Guido Tarn, watching the collapse of his warehouse operation from a private office overlooking the floor, makes his last move as the fight winds down around him. Not a weapon, but a lever, hidden behind a false panel, connected to a chain of detonators wired into the warehouse's support structure. If I go down, he says, loud enough to carry, this entire port goes with me. Every dock, every warehouse, half the harbor district. He's not bluffing about the wiring. Dan confirms that in seconds, tracing the chain with an expression that's gone entirely grim. 6 detonators, evenly spaced, each one identical to the eye, each one wired to trigger the next in sequence the moment any single one fires. There's no time to disarm them all individually, Dan says. We need to know which one actually matters. I'm already moving, exhausted past the point I should still be standing, blood dried along my chin and fresh along my arm. And I let the gold lines settle over the row of detonators the way they settled over 1,000 identical caskets in a drowned city that nearly killed me for the privilege of understanding it. 5 of them read as exactly what they appear to be: real, live, wired correctly, dangerous. The 4th from the left reads wrong. Not fake, not decoy in the way the 99 items in the vault were decoys, but the single point where the actual chain connects. The one Guido's people would need to trigger by hand rather than by the sequence, because someone building an insurance policy this large doesn't leave it entirely to chance. 4th one, I say. Cut that connection, the rest can't fire in sequence. The inspector doesn't hesitate. She's already moving, and the wire parts under her blade a half second before Guido's hand finds the lever, and nothing happens except a dead man's insurance policy failing to pay out. And Guido Tarn standing in his own office with no leverage left at all. They take him into custody without further resistance. There isn't any fight left in a man whose last card just failed in front of witnesses from the Crown itself. We win the port. We don't win it clean. Word reaches us before dawn that the bunker took a hit while we were occupied on the docks. A retaliatory strike, Aria warned, might come the moment Guido realized how close we were. Executed by men we never identify, gone before the neighbors even reported the noise. The ward's Bren-dyed building held against a forced entry. They didn't hold against fire set from outside, close enough to the door to scorch stone without ever breaching it. I stand in front of the damage the next morning. Smoke-blackened wall, one corner of the workbench burned past saving, everything else intact by the narrowest margin. And think about how much rebuilding it, and thank whatever's left of luck that it wasn't worse. Victory's expensive, Aria says, standing beside me. Everything's been expensive since I picked up that loop. Some things buy back what they cost. She nods toward the street, where a hired carriage waits to take us to the Crown offices to finalize Guido's charges. It's mine, paid for outright rather than rented by the hour, the first thing I've bought since this began that exists purely because I can afford it rather than because I strictly need it. We pass Felix's shop on the way, shuttered now, a notice from the guild nailed to the door, pending investigation into the family's business affairs. He's standing outside it, arms crossed, watching everything he inherited come apart, while a coat he can no longer afford to replace hangs looser on him than it used to. He sees me through the carriage window. I don't know what he reads on my face because I'm not entirely sure myself. Not triumph, not quite. Something closer to the plain fact of 2 lives that started in the same shop and ended up in entirely different places. I don't stop the carriage. There isn't anything left to say to him that the sight of it doesn't already say better. Guido Tarn talks the way most men talk once they understand the alternative is a cell with no window and a family name already ruined beyond saving. He talks fast, and he talks to save himself rather than anyone else, which suits our purposes exactly as well as loyalty would have. You think I built this, he says, across a table in a Crown holding room, flanked by an official whose sole job today is transcription. I inherited half of it and expanded the rest, because refusing wasn't an option by the time I understood what I'd married into. There's someone above me. There's been someone above me the entire time. A name, the inspector says. I never had a name. That's the entire structure of it. Deniability built into every layer, so a man like me could run a region for a decade and never once meet the person actually coordinating it. Instructions came through intermediaries, payments through accounts that closed themselves faster than anyone could trace them. I called them the curator because that's the only word anyone ever used, and I never once questioned it because questioning it wasn't a survivable habit. That's convenient, Dan says, from where he's observing through the room's viewing window. A criminal empire's leader, and somehow the man running an entire region never met his own superior. Convenient doesn't make it false, Guido says, when the comment reaches him secondhand. I dealt with an intermediary. Formal, educated, moved through the guild's own circles without anyone once suspecting what they were carrying alongside their reputation. If you want the curator, look at people your own institutions already trust. That's the entire design of the thing. Hide inside the credibility nobody thinks to question. It's not much. It's enough to change the shape of what we're hunting, from a family with a shipping business into something with roots inside the very institution that spent months deciding whether to trust me. Evelyn comes to the bunker that evening carrying a weight I recognize, because I've carried a version of it myself since Dan first laid out the shipping manifests with my father's name attached to their consequence. My father's name is on 3 of the approvals Guido's people cite as proof of institutional cover, she says, sitting across from me at the workbench that survived the fire with only a scorched corner to show for it. I've spent 2 days going through everything I can access without drawing attention, trying to find out if he signed those knowingly or if someone used his authority without his understanding. And he was blackmailed. She says it flatly, the way you say something you've already grieved before saying it out loud. 11 years ago, before I was old enough to understand what my family actually was, he made a mistake. Nothing criminal, just personal, the kind of thing that ends a marriage rather than a career. And someone found out and used it to secure his signature on documents he didn't fully read for over a decade. He's not the curator. He's a frightened man who's spent 11 years signing what he was told to sign because the alternative was losing everything he'd built and everyone who depended on him. That doesn't undo the damage those signatures caused. No, she agrees. It doesn't. I told him that when I confronted him 2 nights ago. He didn't argue. He gave me everything he has, every letter, every threat, every account number he was ever given, and told me to use it however I judged right, even if that means his own censure. She looks up, and for the first time since the day she called my methods a deflection, there's nothing guarded left in her expression. I believe him, Dorian. I need you to believe me that I checked as hard as I know how before I decided to believe him myself. I think about my own father, dead 5 years for refusing to sign something false. I think about a different kind of man, alive but broken by 11 years of signing exactly what he was told to, and find I don't have room left in me to hate him the way I'd expected to. If this moment ever came, I believe you, I say. That doesn't mean the guild will, no. But it means I'm not walking into the next part of this alone, wondering if the man I'm trying to save is the enemy I've been hunting. The bunker, rebuilt in the weeks since the fire, holds all of us at once for the first time in longer than I can properly remember. Arya stretched out on a bench she's claimed as hers without asking. Rita cleaning a crossbow that doesn't need cleaning because her hands need something to do. Dan cross-referencing something that can wait until morning. Evelyn and Lucia trading gossip near the door about nothing that matters to the larger fight at all. Your father's shipping ledger, Lucia says, to no one in particular, had the ugliest handwriting I've ever seen in a professional document. I had to translate half of it for the inspector myself. He never learned to write slower than he thought, Evelyn says. Neither did mine, honestly. I think it's a chairman thing. You're not a chairman. Give it time. Rita snorts at that, the same short laugh I first heard the night we celebrated Pell's fall, and Arya throws a piece of dried bread at her for interrupting whatever she was actually listening to. And for a while the bunker sounds like nothing more sinister than a room full of people who like each other, tired from a fight that's finally starting to feel survivable instead of merely urgent. I sit near Arya, close enough that our shoulders touch without either of us making a point of it, and for the length of one evening I let myself believe this is what the rest of this could look like, once whatever's coming next is finished. You're quiet, she says, thinking, about the curator, about all of it, Bren, Marla, my father. How much of this only cost what it cost because I kept saying yes to the next thing instead of stopping somewhere safer? I look around the room, Dan's careful notes, Rita's crossbow, Evelyn and Lucia laughing about handwriting like the last months haven't cost either of them a father's good name, and about how none of them regret it either, as far as I can tell, which doesn't make the cost smaller, just easier to carry. That's most of what building something actually is, Arya says, carrying the cost with people who chose to carry it beside you instead of alone. She bumps my shoulder, lighter than the words deserve. You did that. Whatever's left to finish, you're not finishing it the way you started. Broke, alone, carrying a broken drawer out of a shop that never wanted you in it. I think about that drawer, still sitting somewhere in my old rented room, pieces fitted back together but never fully repaired. Some things I've learned these past months don't need to be repaired to still matter. Whoever the curator is, I say, finally, they're about to find out that hiding inside institutional trust doesn't work if someone's willing to look past the institution's word to the truth underneath it. That's your whole trick, isn't it? Arya says, smiling despite everything, seeing what everyone else agreed not to look at too closely. It's the only trick I've got. It's gotten us this far. She stands, offering a hand to pull me up from the bench, and the room around us, rebuilt walls, tired friends. Two women who used to look down on all of us, now sitting comfortably in a space that started as a broken cellar, feels, for the first time since Bren's death, less like a fortress under siege and more like a place worth defending because of what it's already become, rather than only what it's protecting. Get some sleep, she says. Whoever's coordinating all of this from inside our own institutions isn't going to wait politely while we finish being sentimental about it. She's right, and I know it, and I let myself have one more quiet hour in a room full of people who chose to be here anyway before the next part of this begins. Evelyn finds the name 3 days after the bunker's quiet evening together, and she finds it the way most true things eventually surface in this trade, not through a confession, but through a pattern too consistent to be coincidence. Magister Aldrich Venn, she says, spreading a decade of licensing records across the workbench, her hands steady despite what the steadiness clearly costs her. Senior Magister of the Guild for 26 years, sat on the committee at your first hearing, signed off on Pell's original license. Signed off on my father's earliest approvals, back when my father was young enough to trust a mentor's guidance without question. Every irregularity Dan and I have traced eventually roots through a decision Venn either made directly or quietly influenced. He sat across the table from me and called my methods a deflection, I say, remembering the chamber, the long table, 6 officials deciding whether to trust me. I thought that was you. It was both of us that day. I didn't know yet what I was sitting next to. She sets down the last record, the one that ties it together. An account closed the same week Guido's intermediary correspondence went dark, opened originally under a name that traces 3 transfers removed, back to Venn's own signature. He spent 26 years building the exact kind of reputation Guido described. Formal, educated, moved through guild circles without anyone once suspecting what he carried alongside it. Does he know we're this close? He will the moment we move on informally, which means we don't have the luxury of moving formally first. The first strike comes at the bunker 2 nights later, and it isn't subtle the way the earlier attempts were subtle. Venn has stopped pretending he needs deniability, because deniability only matters to a man planning to survive being caught. And everything about this attack reads like a man who's already decided he won't be. 6 of them this time, better armed than Garth's crew, moving with the coordinated precision of people who've studied the bunker's defenses in advance, rather than testing them blind. Rita's alarm sounds before the first blow lands against the reinforced door, giving us the handful of seconds Bren's ward work was built to buy, and it's enough, barely, for all of us to be standing rather than sleeping when the door finally gives. They're not here for the artifacts, Arya says, reading the attacker's formation in the half-second before the fighting starts in earnest. They're here for us? She's right. I understand it fully a moment later, watching them press forward without pausing to check a single shelf. Every motion aimed at the 4 of us, standing between them and nothing they actually want except our silence. The fight that follows is worse than the port, closer quarters, no room to maneuver, Rita's crossbow useless past the first 2 bolts in a space this tight, everything reduced to blade work, and the narrow advantage the system gives me when I let it strip away the surface of an opponent's stance to the weakness underneath. My arm still aches from Garth's blade weeks ago, and I feel every exchange land in that same spot, and somewhere in the chaos, I understand that Venn didn't send 6 men to capture anyone. He sent 6 men to finish what Garth started, and finish it permanently. We hold. Barely. The last of them goes down against the same wall Bren's wards reinforced with his own hands, and I stand in the wreckage of a room that keeps surviving attempts to erase it, breathing hard, blood on my sleeve that isn't entirely mine, and understand this isn't the whole of what's happening tonight. Across the city, in the Guild's central archive, a night clerk hears something moving in the records hall 2 hours before her shift ends and doesn't investigate immediately. Because investigating means leaving her post, and she's been told, firmly, never to leave her post. By the time she does investigate, drawn by a smell of oil that shouldn't be anywhere near paper this old, the fire's already climbing the far shelf, and a man in gilt gray is walking calmly toward the exit with a satchel that used to hold nothing and now holds everything Ven can't afford to have found. Lucia and Evelyn reach the archive 12 minutes after the alarm sounds, faster than anyone reasonably should have, because Evelyn insisted on posting a watch the moment she confirmed Ven's name, certain that whatever else he risked tonight, he wouldn't leave his own paper trail intact to be found in daylight. The guard on duty, an older man named Ferris, 30 years with the guild, the kind of quiet loyalty nobody notices until it costs something, doesn't hesitate when he sees the fire and the man walking toward him with a satchel full of stolen evidence. He puts himself between Ven's man and the exit, and it costs him everything it was always going to cost a man his age against someone younger and desperate. And by the time Lucia and Evelyn reach the hall, he's down and the satchel's gone, and the fire's spreading faster than either of them can fight alone. Dan and Rita arrive minutes behind them, Dan's magic smothering the flame in overlapping layers the same way it smothered Garth's men on the warehouse floor. Rita running down the fleeing courier through streets she knows better than he does. They recover the satchel. They don't recover Ferris, who dies before a healer reaches him. One more name added to a list that started with Bren and grew heavier with every step closer to the truth. I meet Ven myself at the bunker's ruined threshold, less than an hour after his men failed to finish what they came to finish. He arrives without guards, which tells me everything about how little he has left to protect, and how much he's decided this final conversation is worth having in person. He's exactly what 26 years of careful reputation looks like. Silver-haired, composed, dressed like a man who's never once had to justify his own credibility to anyone. Standing in the wreckage of a fight he ordered like it's beneath his notice. "You've caused considerably more trouble than a man your age, and your standing should be capable of causing," he says. "You've caused considerably more damage than a man your reputation should be capable of hiding," I answer. 26 years. My father's career, Bren, Marla, Ferris tonight, I'm guessing, given the timing. Casualties, he says, without a flicker of anything resembling regret, are the cost of an operation this large surviving as long as it has. I'd have thought, given your own losses, you'd understand the calculation better than most. I understand the calculation. I've just never once decided a person's life was an acceptable line item in it. Behind him, close enough to have followed at a careful distance the entire way, the Crown Inspector steps into view with two of her own people. Drawn by Evelyn the moment Ven's name surfaced with enough certainty to justify the risk of a public confrontation instead of a quiet arrest. Ven sees them and doesn't panic, which somehow makes it worse. "You have documents," he says, calm as ever. "Documents can be challenged. Signatures can be explained. A man with my standing has survived worse accusations than a former crate carrier's evidence. I'm not going to argue documents with you," I say. "I'm going to tell everyone standing here exactly what you are, the same way I told a room full of people exactly what that vase was 8 months ago, when I had nothing but the truth and no standing at all to back it. I let the gold lines settle over him the way they've settled over every object I've ever read. Except this time, for the first time since the loop first cut my thumb, it isn't glaze or canvas or old stone I'm reading. It's 26 years of a man building a mask so convincing that an entire institution mistook it for a face. "You're not a magister," I say, loud enough to carry to everyone gathered at the bunker's broken door. "You're a thief who spent a quarter century stealing history and dressing it up as expertise. Every family that lost something to Pell's undervaluing, every collector who bought a forgery believing it was real, every appraiser who lost their license for telling a truth you needed buried. That's your signature underneath all of it, whether or not it's the one written on the page. It's not evidence. It's not proof a court will accept on its own. It's the same thing it's always been. The truth, said plainly, by someone with nothing left to lose by saying it. And something in Ven's composure cracks for the first time since he walked into the wreckage. The mask slipping just enough for the Crown Inspector's people to see what's underneath it before he recovers. That's enough. Combined with the satchel Dan and Rita recovered from tonight's fire, combined with a decade of Evelyn's records, combined with Guido's testimony naming an intermediary who moved through guild circles without suspicion, it's enough for the inspector to take him into custody on the spot No further ceremony required. This isn't finished, Ven says as they lead him away, the first thing approaching genuine feeling he's shown all night. It is for you, I say, and mean it, and watch him go without any triumph left in me at all, just exhaustion, and the particular emptiness of finally reaching the end of something that's cost far more than it should have. We gather what's left of the night at the bunker, Ferris's death sitting heavy over everyone, even as the larger relief settles in around it, the satchel recovered, Ven in custody, the gray auction's central figure finally named and finally caught. It's over, Arya says quietly, like she's testing whether the words hold up under saying them out loud. Most of it, Dan says, the paperwork alone will take months, but the structure's broken. Whatever's left of it collapses without someone at the center coordinating the pieces. I look around the room, Rita cleaning a blade that saw more use tonight than it should have, Lucia sitting close to Evelyn, both of them still catching their breath from a fire that nearly took everything, Arya beside me in a bunker that survived every attempt made to erase it since Bren first sealed its walls. We won. It doesn't feel the way I imagined winning would feel back when this started as nothing more than a broken drawer and 3 coins in my pocket. It feels like something closer to the truth, a cost paid in full by people who chose to pay it together, standing in a room that started as nothing and became somewhere along the way exactly what all of them were worth protecting. The Crown's proclamation is read aloud in the same chamber where Evelyn first called my methods a deflection, and where Ven once sat with the rest of the committee deciding whether to trust me. By order of the Crown, the herald reads, "The license and standing of the evaluator known as Ren Kim, revoked 5 years past on charges now proven false, are hereby restored in full and posthumously." The Crown further recognizes that his findings regarding the tears of the first warden were accurate, and that his death, while never formally ruled otherwise, is understood to be connected to the criminal conspiracy his work exposed. I stand in the gallery reserved for family, which is a strange thing to be called when I'm the only one left to fill it. And I listen to a room full of people who spent 5 years believing my father died a drunk and a fraud here, finally. That he died because he told the truth to people who couldn't afford to let him keep telling it. Nobody in that chamber apologizes to me directly. I don't need them to. The proclamation is enough. His name, spoken clean, entered into the same record that once erased it. The guild's reforms take longer than the proclamation and cost more arguing, but they happen. Ven's committee seats, all 4 of them, are dissolved and reassigned. Evelyn takes one, not because her name opens the door, but because 2 years of quiet, careful work proving her own father's innocence and her own integrity leave the remaining committee with no honest argument against her. Her father resigns his chairmanship the same week publicly before anyone can force the question. He doesn't fight the shame of it. I see him once afterward in a hallway outside the chamber, and he doesn't ask for anything from me. Not forgiveness, not understanding, just nods the way one exhausted man nods at another, and keeps walking. Pell's old license stays revoked. Ferris is honored with a plaque in the archive hall he died defending, small and easy to miss unless you know to look for it, which I do every time I pass through. They give me the title on a morning that feels too ordinary for what it's meant to represent. No grand ceremony, just a formal document in a small gathering in a guild hall that hasn't seen this particular title issued in longer than anyone currently serving has been alive. Absolute appraiser. The guild's own records list only 6 people who've ever held it, the last of them dead 140 years before I was born. You don't have to give a speech, Arya mutters, standing close enough that only I hear it as the committee finishes reading the formal language. Good, I don't have one. You could thank your team. I'm about to. I don't say much in the end, that the title belongs as much to the people who bled beside me as it does to whatever the loop gave me. That it belongs to a man named Bren, who built walls with his own hands and never lived to see what they protected. To a woman named Marla, who traded information for protection and paid the full price of that trade before I could pay her back for it. To Ferris, who held a hallway against a man twice his speed because holding it was simply what 30 years of quiet duty had made of him. I say their names out loud in a chamber that once doubted mine, and nobody in the room asks me to stop. The agency occupies the same footprint the bunker always did, expanded now into the shop above it. My father's old shop, bought back outright rather than leased. The sign above the door reading nothing more elaborate than Kim Appraisals, because I decided early on that the name didn't need decoration to mean something. I walk past Corin's old stall on my way there most mornings. He nods now, the way he never used to, and I nod back, and neither of us mentions the year he didn't bother learning my name. I walk past what used to be Felix's shop too, some mornings, though there's less of it left to walk past every month. He sold what remained of his father's holdings to cover the family's legal costs, and the last I heard, he'd taken work in a smaller trading house 2 districts over, doing the kind of honest labor he once made me do for gratitude instead of wages. I don't go looking for him. Some debts settle themselves without anyone needing to collect in person. My old landlord still greets me by name when I pass the tannery, and still offers the old room if things ever go sideways, and I still tell him I don't think I'll need it, and mean it a little more each time. Dan runs the agency's research wing now, formally, with 2 junior researchers under him who treat his dry corrections like scripture. Rita trains new security staff in the mornings and disappears with Arya on independent contracts in the afternoons. The 2 of them still the fastest answer to any problem that requires speed and precision in equal measure. Evelyn splits her time between her guild seat and the agency's compliance work, making certain nothing we certify ever needs a second look, the way half the guild's old records did. Lucia handles the business side her family once handled dishonestly, doing it properly this time, and doing it well enough that her father, watching from the smaller life he's rebuilt without his old leverage, has started quietly sending her clients he can no longer serve himself. Arya stays close enough that the question of whether she's staying professionally or for other reasons stopped needing an answer months ago. We don't make a production of it. She still kicks my boot under tables when I'm too stiff at gatherings, still claims the same bench in the office whenever she visits, still calls it our bunker even now that it's officially something grander. Feels strange, calling it an agency, she says, one evening, looking around the reinforced walls Bren once built with his own hands and a plaque near the door bearing 3 names, his, Marla's, Ferris's, small enough not to overwhelm the room, permanent enough that nobody working here forgets what it costs to reach this point. Feels strange being able to afford calling it anything, I say. 8 months ago, I owed 40 coins I didn't have. Look at you now. She says it lightly, but there's real weight under it, the kind that comes from having watched every step of the distance between that debt and this room. Pool with your own carriage, your own address, a title nobody's held in a century, and a coat that actually fits. The coat's the real accomplishment. She laughs, and it isn't performance, and for a moment the whole weight of everything this costs sits lighter than it has in a long time. I keep the broken drawer. It sits on a shelf near my desk, still split along the joint my father cut 40 years before I was born, pieces fitted back together but never properly repaired. Because some things aren't meant to be restored to what they were. They're meant to be kept as proof of what they survived. I think about him more some days than others. Not the disgrace, not the death that followed it, but the actual man, patient at his bench, teaching a boy who didn't yet understand the weight of what he was being taught. I think he'd recognize the shop, mostly. I think he'd recognize the work, entirely. I don't know what he'd make of the rest of it. The fights, the losses, a title he never lived long enough to be considered for himself. Except that I hope, standing here now, he'd understand it was never really about the title at all. It was about a boy who wanted more than money, more than safety, more than anything else this trade could offer to prove that what looked worthless to everyone else was never actually worthless. Not the objects, not the man who taught him to see them clearly, not, in the end, himself. The agency's door opens onto a street that doesn't know, most mornings, how close it came to losing this corner of the city to men who valued gold over truth. I stand at that door some evenings, after the researchers have gone home and Rita's locked the training yard and Dan's finished his notes and Arya's waiting, patient, for me to stop staring at nothing and come inside. "You're doing it again," she says. "Doing what? Standing here like you're waiting for someone to take it all away." "Old habit, break it." She takes my hand, not urgent, just certain. "Nobody's taking this away. Not tonight, not tomorrow. It's yours. All of it. Come inside." I look at the sign above the door one more time. Kim Appraisals, my father's name and mine, finally sitting together where they belong. And for the first time since a cracked loop cut my thumb in a shop that never wanted me in it, I don't feel like I'm carrying anything at all. I follow her inside and close the door behind us, and that's where it ends.